I'm proud to be a member of the Massachusetts MLK Coalition, the sponsor for today's event. And I will be introducing our speakers and letting them talk, rather than making you listen to me talk. The first person I would like to introduce to you is Natalie Higgins. Natalie is our representative for Leominster, the 4th Worcester District in the Massachusetts House. I have had the pleasure to know Natalie for about 3 years now. She is, in my opinion, going to be one of the future governors of Massachusetts. Natalie is very dedicated to a lot of good things. Her district, social justice, among other things. So I'd like to introduce, without any further fanfare, Natalie Higgins.
Welcome to Leominster for those of you who traveled. I'm really glad that we get to all be a little warmer together. I am the state representative for the 4th Worcester District, which is the city of Leominster, and I'm such a proud representative to get to represent all of you. But I also have to admit that my energy has been pretty low lately, because I feel like so many people in my life and so many of my constituents are dealing with more and more than they can handle. And I'm so thankful to the Massachusetts Martin Luther King Coalition for pulling this together. You need to hear me a little more. For pulling this together and continuing this tradition of getting us in a room together to have what I hope are tough conversations about how we move our communities forward. One of those things that I think about a lot in running with today's theme is Massachusetts is one of the dozen states that gets to have the reputation of spending more on our prison population than we do on higher education. That is not something that I am very proud of as our state, and it's something that I think we need to work together to make sure that we're creating more opportunities for our community and really putting our money where our mouths are, and making sure that everyone in the Commonwealth understands that they have worth, they have value, and that they have an opportunity in front of them. So I'm so thrilled to be a part of this speaking program. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you all for being here today to honor Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy.
Thank you, Natalie. At this time, I take great pleasure in introducing to you our U.S. Congressional Representative, Jim McGovern.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Reverend Susan, and thank you all for being here today. This is my second event of the day, and I really look forward to coming here. And I want to again thank all of you for coming out on this really, really cold morning, because I think it's important. You know, Dr. King was a leader who called us to goodness. He called us to end racism and bigotry of any kind. He called us to fight for justice. He organized, he marched, he believed in nonviolence and peaceful protest, and yes, he believed in resistance. When we reflect on his legacy, we must never forget the adversity he faced during his lifetime. He was beaten, he was jailed, he was surveilled by his own government. He's popular today, but quite frankly, he wasn't as popular when he was alive, because he was calling into question the status quo. He never gave up. He had enormous courage that I look back on, with incredible awe, wondering whether I or any of us would have the guts and the courage to do what he did. I mean, he literally risked his life every day of fighting for civil rights. And he ultimately lost his life because of the struggle for civil rights. You know, sometimes during these ceremonies and celebrations, and we engage in lofty rhetoric and we breeze over what is really happening in our country. and we pretend that everybody is united in the fight against racism. You know, we dutifully show up every year, we sing "We Shall Overcome," and then too often we're done. And some say that this holiday is not a time to be political or controversial. I respectfully disagree, because Dr. King was both. He led a movement, he pressed our political leaders, he called out presidents of the United States, he appealed to our conscience, and he made the establishment feel uncomfortable. He shook things up. So we can't tiptoe around the divisions and the racial polarization in our country today. It's real, and it's now. I'm sure you have noticed an uptick in hate crimes in this country, an uptick in racial polarization, an uptick in coded language and policy, which is a sneaky way to disguise bigotry and racism and sexism. You know, throughout the incredible history of our country, we have seen many glorious, inspiring moments that when we reflect on them, they make our hearts swell with pride. We have also had moments of shame. And while we're certainly not perfect, we have often evolved, we have often changed, and we've progressed forward. Oftentimes slowly, but usually we keep on going forward. And I always have felt that we were moving closer and closer to Dr. King's dream. But to be frank, in the last couple of years, I feel like we have slid backwards a little bit. And it bothers me greatly, and I know it bothers everybody here. Because for the sake of my kids, and I know your kids and grandkids, I mean, we want this country to get better. We want this country to move forward. We don't want this country going backwards. It's 2019, and we actually have members of Congress, like Steve King of Iowa, who don't understand why white supremacy and white nationalism are offensive. That's what he said to the New York Times. Congress passed a resolution of disapproval last week, but I have to wonder what took us so long. Because this is not the first time we've heard racist comments from Mr. King, and quite frankly, he's not the only one. We have a President of the United States who has publicly demeaned women, who has has stated a moral equivalency between white supremacists and neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville and the peaceful protesters who marched against them. He's called for a Muslim ban. He is trying to change our immigration laws so that we are judging people on where they were born and what their religion is rather than on who they are. He's referred to Mexicans as rapists. And he has shut this government down over a stupid border wall, which most experts will tell you will do nothing to enhance border security, will cost tens of billions of dollars, and he said Mexico was going to pay for it. Look, it is legitimate to have a discussion about border security. And that's a debate that we should have. That's fine. But let's be clear about what this border wall is about and what it's meant to be about. This border wall is meant to be a racist dog whistle. Basically to kind of demonize immigrants coming into this country. And let's be clear, let me tell you why I said it. He's not talking about a border wall, between the United States and Canada to our north. He's talking about a border wall to our south, where the immigrants more likely to come into our country have darker skin. While some argue that racism doesn't exist anymore, Michelle Alexander wrote in The New Jim Crow, which is a great book, that we have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. And I think she's right. I'm really sad about that. You know, a reporter earlier, I was in Worcester, asked me whether I thought the president was a racist. And I said, to be honest with you, it doesn't matter what I think. And I referred to the words of Florida gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum, who said what matters is that the racist think he's a racist. And that should trouble all of us. And this is not about political party, by the way. I mean, I don't care what political party you are. If you're advocating and saying some of the things that are being said out of Washington right now, we all should raise our voices. You know, in 1959, Dr. King said, and I quote, "History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period is not the strident clamor of bad people, but the appalling silence of good people," end quote. Being silent is what got us to this tipping point that we're all facing here today. So we have to raise our voices, and we have to call out those voices of intolerance, whether they're in Washington, whether they're in our state government, local government, or whether it's in our families. You know, I don't know how many of you saw the musical Hamilton, which I did. I was one fortunate to see it. But there's a great line in there about making sure that we take a look at, this is the line, the room where it happens. Making sure, and we need to make sure that that we're taking a look into the room where it happens, making sure that people of color are not only invited into that room, but are also included in our conversations. This last election brought some incredible diversity to the United States House of Representatives. And it really was quite gratifying to me to see such a diverse group of people get elected. But the bottom line is, if you come to Capitol Hill and you walk through the halls of Congress, the people who are working up there don't look like America. I became the chairman of the House Rules Committee. One of the things we have to do, first thing we have to do is write the rules of the House. And we have all kinds of good things that we put into the rules of the House. But one of the things that I did, which I'm really proud of, is we established the first ever Office of Diversity in Congress, so that Congress looks more like America. The people who work in Congress look more like America. You know, an old history professor of mine used to always end every class by saying the same thing. He'd say, "The world will not get better on its own." And in all honesty, when I was taking the class, I didn't quite know what he was talking about. But I do now. You know, nothing good happens, nothing great happens unless like-minded people come together and demand change. You know, the civil rights movement, the progress in civil rights didn't just happen because Dr. Martin Luther King gave a great speech or because he said he wanted it to happen. It happened because he organized people. He inspired people, and people came together and they demanded change. And so, you know, we can do amazing things. We can eliminate racism. We can eliminate sexism. We can eliminate anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and homophobia and all the bigotry and hate that seeks to divide and destroy our country. But it's going to take a lot more than speeches and coming to events like this. It's going to require us to make a renewed commitment to really be involved in that change. We all need to step it up, myself included. We all need to do better because we're at this moment in time where, quite frankly, it demands that we do better. So I want to say that we are here because we honor Dr. Martin Luther King. We are here because we love this country. We all want it to be better. We all want it to be good and decent and honorable, where everybody matters, where everybody is respected. And we want it to live up to Lincoln's phrase, where we appeal to the better angels of our nature. And I believe we can get there. I really do. I'll just close with this. You know, I said this is my second event today. I was at another event on Saturday with some young students who had written essays and poems about what this day means to them. And I'm reading through these poems and essays by, middle school students and high school students, and they're unbelievable. I mean, they get it. if they're the future, we're going to be fine. So we need to be wind at their back. And we need to raise our voices. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, but we have to. I again thank you for having me here every year. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues in government, Natalie Higgins and so many others. I know the mayor may be coming, but I'm worried, but I'm also hopeful, and you all give me great hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congressman. At this time, I note that our Massachusetts State Senator, Dean Tronk, could not be with us today. However, we have Jonathan Zahn here to make a few comments. So I'll invite Jonathan.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Jonathan Zane, and I'm the Scheduler and Constituent Service Coordinator for State Senator Dean Tran. First of all, I would like to thank Reverend Brown for her cordial invitation, and I would like to also thank the congregation for your support for our office. It is because of your support and help that we are able to make a difference to better our community. Senator Tran would very much like to be here himself, but unfortunately, due to scheduling conflicts, he is not able to join us today. It is with great honor and privilege for me to be here today and share my voice on behalf of Senator Tran. Speaking of the greatness of Dr. King, did you know that his speech, "I Have a Dream," is printed in the textbook of Chinese elementary school? I can attest to that, because when I was a kid in school in China, this is where I first learned the passionate words of Dr. King. I couldn't even name the name of American president at the time. This is how everlasting and influential he is to the world. At a time when the Bank of Justice was bankrupted, Dr. King rose up and united all people in the name of God and love to realize the promise made to everyone in the Declaration of Independence. Dr. King's blood and sweat paved the way for the rights and freedom we are so fortunate to enjoy today. My girlfriend Michelle just came back from Northern Ireland, and everywhere she went, every church she went, she was welcomed warmly. And the director of the museum told Michelle that we here respect and admire Americans very much. It is because of the civil rights movement you guys had. That civil rights movement, that efforts Dr. King put forward, is a beacon light of hope to the people around the world who yearn for freedom and equality. As some of you might know, Senator Tran was born in Vietnam and at the end of the Vietnam War. His father fought alongside American soldiers in the fight against communist tyranny to define the freedom. When the war was lost, Senator Tran's family fled the country to pursue the American dream. They drifted in the ocean for weeks, endured unthinkable trials and tribulations, and they finally were fortunate to land in a refugee camp where they waited another 2 years before a priest sponsored them to immigrate to the United States. And I was born and raised in China, a totalitarian country where political freedom is subject to the whim of the Chinese government. I had been a Christian since my early teens, but I wasn't able to get baptized because of Chinese laws and regulations. Baptizing students was forbidden in China. It is still forbidden. After I graduated from high school, I was very fortunate to get an opportunity from my pastor to be sponsored to go to a Christian college here in America, Gordon College. That was how my American dream started. Do you remember Dr. Martin Luther King's American dream? He dreamed that one day this country will be a nation where people will not judge by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Thanks to his dream and all the people who lent their force for justice, Today, the boy who immigrated to the U.S. as a refugee from Vietnam is the senator representing Worcester and Middlesex District. And the student who left China for Gordon College was baptized on a Christmas day on Park Street, in Park Street Church of Boston, and is able to work for the first Asian senator ever elected to the state of Massachusetts. I think we can say with pride that largely Senator King's dream is realized and completed. However, as Congressman McGovern also pointed out, we have slipped back in the recent days. In some places of today's world, discrimination, negligence, and bigotry are still made on the basis of sex, gender, race, and age. It was not until recently, 2017, that Senator Tran became the first minority to be elected from this district. Yet there are still people out there who want to take away this achievement. These are reminders to us that the task for justice handed to us by Dr. King is not fully completed. We still need to remember and learn from Dr. King's spirit to preserve the freedom and equality that was sought by Dr. King. So let's embody the change the world needs. Let's drive out darkness with light and hate with love. Thank you all very much.
At this point, I would like to return the DS to Reverend Emeritus Dr. Susan Sahusky Brown.
You know, the coalition, Linda will talk about it being our 20th anniversary in a couple of minutes, but we have always had an ongoing theme of keeping alive the legacy of Dr. King. And that theme emerges year after year, and through addressing this theme, we hope to help our children, the larger community, and ourselves to come to a new understanding of our diverse heritage and also of the racism that is still rampant in our country. And most of all, we hope always to bring to mind the lasting influence of Reverend Dr. King on addressing these issues. Any of you involved in community work know that nothing ever happens without committed individuals and volunteers. And with that in mind, I would ask the members of the Martin Luther King Jr. Coalition to rise and be recognized. As well. And if anyone would like to become a member of our coalition, you have seen all of our pretty faces. Okay? I noticed that Mayor is here. And so we'd like you to come up before I give opening words and say good morning or good afternoon.
No, I'm stuck between good morning and good afternoon. Does that mess you up? I'm stuck between the two.
Yes.
Good morning.
Yeah, we've been stuck for a long time.
But I never missed one of these.
You have
No, actually I did. You know what I was? I was in Atlanta for Martin Luther King Day. But you know what happened? There was an ice storm. But it didn't stop anybody. They had a parade and people were freaking out. You know, it is Atlanta, you got an ice storm. It was all ice. I mean, all ice. They didn't even know what to put on the ground. So they were just grabbing anything that, like salt shake, anything, literally, just on the ground to try to, get it so you could climb the hills. But it was pretty interesting. That's the only one I missed. Anyway, good afternoon, I guess it is. And so when I walked in, I saw these pictures. And so last night, I listen to a lot of radio, and if I can't sleep, I turn the radio on. And there's a commentator on through the night. Last night, he was going into somebody, and he ended the show this morning at about 4:30. He said, "We've made so much progress, and then we haven't." And that's all he said. That's it. The whole night, that's all he said. And I started scratching my head and went, what does he mean by that? But I guess I do. Then I came in and I saw him, looking at those pictures, and I started thinking. My grandparents immigrated from Italy, both sides. My father grew up in the west end of Boston, which is right where the North Station is, the Boston Garden. My father was a factory worker, my mother worked at Bradley's. Believe it or not, at Bradley's. I was a bag boy, paper boy, a police officer here in Leominster, and I got a chance to be mayor. And I thought, when I walked in, I might be one of the luckiest people in the universe, because I lived in a community of total acceptance. Kids I went to school with, kids I worked with. My father grew up in a community where there were Jewish people, African Americans, Italians, Irish, all in one neighborhood. And I thought, I might be one of the luckiest people because I get to go to all the different churches in town. I have friends, every belief you can imagine, and then some. They haven't been categorized yet as religious beliefs. And I think, I live in a prejudice-free community. People are really accepting. They really are. We never had that issue as a police officer, never saw the issue. Never saw it as mayor. There are things that come up. There was no question about it. But there's one thing that I like. When something controversial happens, I want to go right to those people. Terry knows this. And I want to ask them their story. Because everybody, I've heard Natalie's story, I've heard the congressman's story, the senator. Everybody has a story, don't they? But how often do we get a chance to listen to it? Many times never. And you just got up here and told a wonderful story about how you couldn't be baptized in the country you were in. What an incredible story. I couldn't imagine it. Maybe many of you could. I know a lot of people have experienced prejudice, and they saw a lot of this happen. I grew up in the 60s. I still think it's a bad dream. I do. So I might just be one of the most luckiest people in the world to work with people like yourself and all of the people in the coalition. It's a really good community where people are really accepting of each other. And it might just be that we are a community of immigrants. So we understand that part. We all understand that part. So from one of the luckiest guys probably in the world, at least in this country, at least in this city, I thank you for continuing to show up to these events. As the commentator said this morning, we've made a lot of progress. And then we haven't. So that's incumbent upon each one of us to celebrate the accomplishments, and then get to work this afternoon on the places that we haven't been so successful. But that can't happen without everybody here sort of carrying that up to the community, taking your story and sharing it. I love people's stories. Thank you.
And thinking about people's stories and remembering the coalition's work, I want us to take just a moment to remember Lynn Lockhart, one of the founding members of the coalition who died this past Friday. Lynn had occasion to hear Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he spoke in Boston in the 60s. And she often reflected on how moving and powerful that occasion was. Lynn, we thank you for all that you did to try to make a difference. You were a champion for peace. May you rest in peace. In this, our 20th year, I also name other members of the coalition. Robin Goodwin, Dr. Lorraine Hazard, Yvette Brooks, and Lisa Maxwell. Each person's story helped to make the coalition what it is today in our 20 years. And so now I say, let us be together. Let us be together in love, in respect, in honor, in appreciation, in wonder, in joy. Let us be together in harmony. Let us be together with unity, with peace, with hope, with charity, with compassion, with justice, with mercy. And let us be together with gladness for all that makes us humans, striving to be and become more than we are. Become more humble, more merciful, more justice-seeking and loving. Fill us with the spirit of all those heroes and heroines, saints and saviors, named and unnamed. And fill us with the spirit of Martin, in whose name we are gathered this day, whose name means justice, unity, compassion, courage, vision, and hope. Fill us with his spirit of love, of hope, and of justice. Let us be together this day and in all the days to come. Welcome. We are ever so glad you are here with us.
sneaked in under the radar, so. At this point, I take great pleasure in announcing another person who will make a few remarks. Linda Mason has been a tireless worker. She does all the jobs that nobody else wants to do, like designing brochures and going to Staples to see that they're printed. These are the low-level jobs that everybody just depends on but doesn't want to do. And Linda's like that. She is a mover and a shaker. I've known Linda for something like 18 years now. I feel privileged to consider her a good friend. So Linda's been the driving force of these observances for quite some time, and I look forward to welcoming her to the podium to give us a few insights as to what it is we do here. Linda Mason.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, I'd like to, I'm going to be sharing a little bit of our history, try to sort of summarize our history. We've been in existence, as Reverend Susan said, for the last 20 years, and put on a program every year, and some of you have attended, I think, probably almost all 20, if not, 20, somewhere close to that. So we really appreciate that, and encourage you to keep supporting us and what we try to do with bringing the community together. So I'm going to just share a little bit of our history. Beginnings. I personally became involved with the coalition 17 years ago, so I've been, with it for quite some time. Anyway, the beginning of our shall I hold it? Our history. In 1999, Reverend Susan Zahusky Brown and members of First Church Union Diversity Committee realized that there was neither recognition nor remembrance of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King in the Leominster area. This church group felt that there was a need to reawaken and honor Dr. King's dream locally. The goal was to work within the community and with the schools to involve students. From this beginning, the MLK Coalition was created. In January 2000, the first community celebration began with a program to praise and appreciate MLK's life and legacy. Guest speaker Alaric Hunter with Pastor Gary Palmer and the New Hope Baptist Church Choir christened a now nearly 20-year tradition. The following year featured guest speaker Reverend John Reynolds, a foot soldier in the civil rights movement who was arrested more than 20 times and endured numerous beatings. For the first 2 years, commemorations were held at Leominster City Hall. In January 2002, neighboring Fitchburg and Gardner communities were invited to join. For the third year of the annual program, two consecutive events were held. The first portion of the day presented a buffet at the Four Points Hotel in Leominster with guest speaker Professor Thomas A. Malloy from Mount Wachusett Community College in Gardner. Music was provided by a male a cappella group, We Are Persuaded, from Atlantic Union College in South Lancaster. Following this, an afternoon celebration was held at Memorial Middle School in Fitchburg with speaking, singing, performance art, and fine art, fellowship, and food. Memorial Middle School Principal Francis Thomas spoke during this portion of the day. The fourth year found Gardner hosting the celebration with Mount Wachusett Community College taking an active role in planning, participation, and financial support. Each annual program became organized around a central unifying theme. The first annual theme created was Brotherhood and Humanity, Then and Now. Essays, artwork, and eventually drama came from schools in each of the 3 cities. With new members, partnerships, participation, and ideas, the annual event grew more diverse and inclusive. Currently, from year 5 forward, it was decided to return the event to its roots here at the Leominster First Church Unitarian Universalist, where the coalition concept was conceived. As well, it was felt that a church setting was appropriately fitting for honoring this gifted preacher and leader. Currently, an annual program is created to celebrate and honor Reverend Dr. King's legacy in a contemporary context. The goal is for guests to derive an understanding of the principles, practices, and philosophy that Dr. King espoused and realize his ideals are timeless. The hope is that those present are uplifted and inspired from the various portions of the program which present his principles through art, drama, speech, and song. Over the years, our annual events have been fortunate to host high-quality, gifted, inspirational speakers. We have heard local leaders, activists, administrators, authors, editors, educators, preachers, professors, and a physician who have engaged, enlightened, energized, cajoled, and challenged us to do better. Our superb speakers have traveled from as far as Harlem, New York, to provide a perspective on the times and timeless message of Dr. King. The MLK Coalition has collaborated with North Central Massachusetts Youth Alliance, the Luck Organization, the United Way, and has received partial sponsorship by the Health Alliance Hospital, Leominster, the Leominster Community Coalition, the Leominster, Massachusetts Cultural Council, and the Anti-Defamation League, No Place for Hate. Celebrations have been held at Leominster City Hall, Mount Wachusett Community College, Sheridan Four Points Hotel, Memorial Middle School, and First Church, where the coalition was formed. In fellowship, the MLK has hosted breakfast, brunch, or dinner prior to or post each event. Modest in size, the coalition is comprised of, about 9 members, and welcomes the interest of others who would like to become involved. Each year I reflect and look back at the prior year and note any of the individuals who have worked during the course of their life for civil rights. And I do something, I share something I call memorials and milestones. So I'd first like to share a couple of memorials to people who passed this in 2018. Who had a significant role in the civil rights movement. The first being Linda Brown, who at age 9 became a key figure in the landmark Brown versus Board of Education, Supreme Court that struck down segregation in the nation's schools. She died in March of last year at age 76. Just a little bit of a background, the Supreme Court eventually ruled that racial segregation of children in public schools violated Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. It overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, an 1896 decision that held that segregated public facilities were constitutional as long as black and white facilities were equal. The ruling constitutionally sanctioned laws barring African Americans from sharing the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as whites, known as Jim Crow laws, and established the separate but equal doctrine that would stand for the next 60 years. Aretha Louise Franklin, as we probably all know as the Queen of Soul, passed away on August 16th, 2018. Her journey from singing in her father's church before becoming the voice of the civil rights movement also embodied the African American experience of the 1960s. Her makeover of Otis Redding's Respect was more than just a #1 pop hit in 1967. It would become a rallying cry for African Americans and women and anyone else who felt marginalized. Respect became an anthem for that charged moment in history of civil rights and the women's movement. It was an appeal for dignity and a call to action. And a milestone, a couple of milestones involving, or a milestone involving a person who is still with us, and some of whom probably you may know. She was in Star Trek. Her name is, let me begin here. At the height of the American Civil Rights Movement, At the height of the American Civil Rights Movement, Nichelle Nichols played Star Trek's Lieutenant Uhura, then one of television's few confident, strong black female characters. It was a trailblazing role she nearly walked away from until a certain legendary activist and super fan intervened. Who knew Dr. Martin Luther King was a Trekkie? Nichelle Nichols' role as Uhura on Star Trek was one of the first times that an African-American actress played a non-stereotypical role on television. Previously, most African-American female characters on American television were depicted as maids or housekeepers, and Nichols' role helped break that barrier. Nichols with series star William Shatner in another breakthrough with an episodic television first, interracial kiss between fictional characters. Nichols became the first African-American actress to place her hands in front of Hollywood's Grauman's Chinese Theater along the rest of the Star Trek cast. In 1992, she earned her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. After meeting Nichols of Star Trek's convention in 1975, a NASA scientist suggested that the actress take part in NASA's recruitment drive. In 1977, Nichols took on the role, making recruitment and training films and supervising astronauts and hopefuls. Within 6 months, the applicant count went from fewer than 100 a year to 1,649. Most of the recruits that she attracted were women or from ethnic minorities. For her efforts, Nichols was named as NASA's Woman of the Year in 1979. NASA's astronauts Sally Ride, Guy Bluford, Judith Resnick, and Ronald McNair were all recruited as a result of Nichols' employ as NASA's recruiter, specifically for minorities. Dr. Mae Jemison, a fan of the original Star Trek, also was inspired by Nichols, becoming the first African-American female astronaut. Nichelle Nichols had decided to leave the original Star Trek series after the first season. Fed up with racial harassment and limitation culminating with her learning that studio executives were withholding her fan mail, she submitted her resignation. She withdrew it when Dr. King convinced her that her role was too important a cultural breakthrough to leave. Live long and prosper. Nichelle Nichols, who turned 86 on December 28, 2018, surely has. At this time, I would like to welcome our soloist, Chantel Woodson, who will sing Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce Chantel. And Mayor, if you have a moment afterwards, I'd like to inquire as to where that community is, that prejudice-free community is. I've been searching my mind for that. But anyway, thank you for coming here this afternoon. And Chantel deserves an introduction. She was just a powerful songstress. And James Weldon Johnson was a principal of a segregated school who wrote. Oh, thank you. I've been telling everybody else to speak up. James Weldon Johnson, the principal of a segregated school, wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing. To celebrate Lincoln's birthday in 1900, 500 of Johnson's school children performed this song that rouses, unites, celebrates, and calls to action. Race is never mentioned, but it is a poem that is all about race and more. After all, it was written by a black man who lived in the South where Jim Crow was in full effect. And it was inspired by Gordon, this sculpture up here. This is the replica of a real slave, Gordon from Mississippi. And he represents millions of slaves who were brutalized during slavery. And so that certainly was on his mind when he wrote Lift Every Voice. But he had hope. He had hope even so. And yet it is a song about the present struggle for freedom for all. We have with us today a young lady who has been gifted with a powerful talent to bring the relevance of this song to its fullest. Every time I hear Chantel sing, I am nearly moved to tears with her sincerity and how deeply she lives and breathes the songs she renders. It's always a privilege to hear you. Chantel.
Many of you know me from the community, from my job, Veteran Homestead here in the community, and some of you have heard me sing from time to time, but many times when this song is sang, it's just the first verse. Just the first verse and the chorus, and it's such a beautiful song, but this was the first time that I've been able to sit down and actually read the lyrics of this entire song. And one of the lines that stuck out to me was that it said that may we may not forget thee, may we forever be shadowed underneath thy hand, and lest our hearts be drunk with wine of the world, may we not forget thee. And so many times we forget where we come from. So many times we get so caught up in life, we get so caught up in every day, we get so caught up in who we're trying to impress and who we want to be that we forgot where we come from. So I just hope that this song just reminds you of where we come from and where it is that we're trying to go.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound high as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has taught us. Facing the rising sun of our new days begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over the way with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past till now we stand Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath our wing, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you very much, Chantel. That was pretty good. On a personal note, I don't know if you remember me, Chantel. You and I ran into each other going over to the Leominster Fights homelessness meeting a couple of months ago. And Chantel asked me if that was the building where the meeting was occurring. I said, I'm following you. You just seem to have a certain gravitas. Turns out I was right. So I'm going to take a break from introducing people because our keynote speaker will be introduced by Winnie Beasley.
Well, I'm thrilled to have Professor Lisa Moisen as our keynote speaker today. Her academic credentials are written in your program, but her talents far exceed that brief biographical sketch. Professor Moisen is a passionate and compassionate educator who breathes enthusiasm into her lesson as easily as breathing air. She is a natural teacher who loves what she does. She enjoys working with students of all ages. I've been one. She listens and incorporates what she hears into the class discussion. She cares about her subject and her students alike. And for that reason, she comes to us with rave reviews. The Southern Poverty Law Center said, and I quote, "We tend to bathe Dr. Martin Luther King's memory in a glow of nostalgia that threatens to relegate the injustices he fought to the past, as though the struggle is over. I believe that if Dr. King were with us today, he would be in the front line, protesting the shame of our criminal justice system. That being said, it is incumbent upon us to do what we can to correct that system and ameliorate the suffering of those directly and indirectly affected by it, to include you and me. Through her belief in the therapeutic benefits of the written word, Professor Moisen has sought to bring that tool to those behind iron bars, to give them a voice in their lives and their future. She places a human face to the faceless and persuades us of their humanity. In the new Jim Crow, as Congressman McGovern already mentioned, Michelle Alexander envisions a society where, I quote, we value education over incarceration, jobs over jails, a society that knows there are better uses for $1 trillion than waging a drug war on its poorest and the most vulnerable members, where the voices of those who have been locked up, locked out, and left behind can be heard loud and clear. Today, through Professor Moisen's guidance, we will hear some of those voices. She's amazing, I tell you, she's amazing. Please give Professor Moyson a warm welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Start my presentation here. It's hard to start after Chantel there. I have no pipes. Just a minute here for the technology. Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Take this one here and learn from everyone else. This morning, again, my name is Dr. Lisa Moyson, and I'm the Assistant Dean for Graduate and Continuing Education at Fitchburg State University. I traveled all the way here today from Cleghorn in Fitchburg, and it was a very cold 12-minute drive from Fitchburg. I am lucky enough that I went to Fitchburg State University. I'm not actually from the area. I came here to go to college 25 years ago and fell in love with Fitchburg. And I fell in love with a Fitchburg boy who's in the crowd. If you can raise your hand, my husband Matthew Moyson is here. I met him at Fitchburg State, and he's never left Cleghorn, actually. So, yeah, this is the farthest away he's ever been. He came to Leominster today. As Winnie said, we were in a class that I taught together at Fitchburg State for adult learning in the Fitchburg area. And the university really opens its doors to everyone. On our campus, we have a pre-K through 8 school. We have a lab school, as well as our traditional college students. We have graduate students, and we have senior citizens from the community. So literally, we have students on our campus from the age of 4 to 94. And it's a really exciting place to be. When Winnie emailed me and she said, would you like to come speak on Martin Luther King's birthday to celebrate his legacy, I read the email and I read it again, and I stopped and I was nervous. I am not black. And I thought to myself, I have no right. I have no right to come and to speak on this. And it made me nervous. I'm not an expert in it. And I stopped and I read the email again. And I had an email ready, Winnie, that said no, and because I was scared. And I said no. I said, Winnie sees something in me that I don't see in myself, and I'm going to trust her. And I'm going to come and I'm going to speak. And I'm going to share with you today some statistics. We're going to look at this issue of mass incarceration and race from the 50-foot-thousand level. We're going to look at some really big statistics, and then we're going to bring it down to our level. We're going to talk a little bit about what we can do as community members together to make a difference, because it's a big issue, and it seems as if there isn't anything you can do as an individual. There's a lot that you can do. I am also going to ask you to sit today and be okay with being uncomfortable. There are some things and some slides, some statistics we're going to talk about that might make you feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's a space these days that we don't like to sit in, but that's where Dr. King wants us to sit. That's where we do the work, when we're uncomfortable. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because he writes a lot about that as well. So I'm going to call into the room, because we need a little warmth, I'm going to call into the room some grace. I am here with your permission, and I'm going to ask that if I make you uncomfortable at all, just sit with it for a little bit, okay? And we'll work through it together. All right. We're going to talk about poetry today. I bet you think you're going to do that. All right. So Dr. King was obviously, he was incarcerated. He was jailed on several different occasions, most notably in Birmingham, Alabama. And that's where he actually writes, pens a very long essay in response to the clergy and the black leaders in Birmingham, believe it or not, saying to him that they don't want him to come. They're nervous, right? They've seen what has happened and occurred in other communities when Dr. King arrives. And they're nervous. They're nervous about what this could mean for their community. And he's jailed. He's jailed for his extremism, right? And for what he wants to have happen in Birmingham. And he pens his letters, right? The notes from Birmingham. He sits down and he does that. And these are some of the actual photos from what happens during that time period. And people actually wore these buttons in Birmingham who didn't want him to be there, the white community who didn't want him to be there, saying that they wanted him to be jailed. And the photos are just sort of, they speak for themselves. And they are meaningful today. And we'll see some photos later as well that'll tie into this. And again, this is where he pens his letters from a Birmingham jail. I'm sure. And if you've not had a chance to read this, please do. Please make a commitment that between today and the time that you come here next year and you sit down in these pews, you have read this. Right? It's more than just an essay. It's amazing, and I think it's poetry. What he writes when he's there in Birmingham. So again, he's imprisoned in Birmingham, Alabama. He's imprisoned for 11 days in 1963. And in his notes, in his letters, he discusses the 4 steps of creating a nonviolent campaign, which are very famous today. He also lays out, and his letter is penned to the clergy in the black community who they don't want him to be there. And he also lays out for them 5 moral arguments for why you should resist and why you should protest. And he makes a moral argument about why it is moral to protest, why it is moral to resist. Right? He's charged with being an extremist. Right? And he talks about the nonviolent resistance as a middle path between passivity and violent resistance. And this is critical. This is really critical to his philosophy between doing nothing and the extremism on the other side, which is just so very violent. And he says that there's a path in the middle there for what he calls creative tension or creative extremism. I think what a wonderful turn of phrase. And the moment I say it, you know exactly what it is, right? That moment of creative tension, that's where we can get something done together. Being uncomfortable, right? With one another, with the issue. Right? He also talks about something called the moral dimension of time. This is, it's so amazing just how he can see this. So he says that time is neutral. Now he pens this in his letter. Time is actually neutral. Many people in the movement at that time, and even today, feel that time in and of itself will cure racism. It's inevitable. This can't keep it. It can't stay this way. And that somehow time itself will cure it, which is not the case at all. Dr. King says time is actually neutral. Time doesn't care. It's what we do with that time together that is going to make some kind of a change. It is not inevitable that racism will go away and disappear, and bigotry and prejudice. So those were his, that's what he pens during that time. 11 days, he writes all that. Pretty amazing. We talked a little bit, some folks have talked before me, have touched on this, but there's actually 3 waves of slavery here in the United States. The one we are most familiar with from our history books, right, is depicted here. That's the slavery that we think of when we think of the Civil War, and we think of plantations in the South, and people being brought over on boats, and being enslaved and shackled, and that's the tradition of what we think of when it comes to slavery. We've had two other waves of slavery here in the United States. The second one is Jim Crow. So the Jim Crow laws, which was our second wave, and it diminished the ability of Black Americans to engage in the political process and live free and equal lives. That was the second wave. And the third wave is actually currently happening right now, and that is through mass incarceration. And that is, I think that controversial to say. I think that there could be people who would say that slavery has ended. I would posit that it has not. It has just taken on a completely different form than we're used to seeing. And we're going to look at some statistics that are going to help sort of shape that argument. If you Google prisoner or inmate, incarcerated, jail, and you take a look at what Google serves up to you for images, it's shocking, because most of them are going to be Black men. That's what comes right above. Most of the images will be of Black men. Right? So let's talk a little bit about, let's start with some statistics. So these are prison admission rates. You can see here from 1940 into the 2000s. This is two different studies that were overlaid on top of one another. I hope everybody who's sitting over here can see this piece to it. We can see that incarceration rates really begin to rise in the late, sort of in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s. We can see a huge shift, I mean, a massive spike, and in particular for Black America. It's just amazing when we begin to take a look at the statistics. And you might say to yourself, well, why is that occurring during this particular period of time? Why is it the late 60s into the 80s and then into the 90s? We're seeing this huge rise in the number of Black Americans that are being incarcerated, mostly Black men, and then in the late 80s and early 90s, we see Black women outstrip Black men in being incarcerated. And I have some statistics to take a look at with that as well. There's some reasons why that happens. But a lot of this has to do with some significant policy changes that occur in the United States. There are three main policies that correlate exactly to the grid that I just showed. So in 1968, you may have heard of Richard Nixon, right? So some of you here may have, can remember him being around. I was born in 1968. So between 1969 and 1973, his presidential campaign, he runs on something that's called Law and Order, right? Dun, 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 right? The Law and Order that we're all, right? So he just, that's part of his campaign, that he says that there's rising crime rates and he's the person who's going to be able to come in and fix it. And so obviously he gets elected, and between 1969 and 1973, the federal government triples the law enforcement budget. The principal conduit for the funds is the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, or the LEAA, and they receive 11 times the amount of funding than they had in 1969. So he really puts his money where his mouth is, and he starts funding this. This is really the beginning of sort of modern, sort of the idea of putting that the government is going to be putting a large amount of money into public safety and law and order, and it's something that he does. So there's a lot of money being funneled into it. Then in 1986, Ronald Reagan signs the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, and those funds were allocated to build new prisons. This is huge. We have a lot of prisons here in the United States. To build new prisons for drug education and treatment, so that's not a bad thing at all, right? But, and here's the really important piece to this, but also in that legislation, its main result was to create mandatory minimum sentences. And this is where you have, this is also the rise of crack cocaine in some of our poorest communities. And you can have a small amount of crack on you, but there's mandatory minimum sentences now, right? So whereas you might not have had to serve as much time, or maybe at all, now you are definitely going to be landing in one of those bright new shiny prisons. This really hits our Black female community the hardest in some of the poorest areas. In 1994, we have Bill Clinton, and he follows up with passing the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. It, once again, increases drug treatment, right? Programs, gun safety laws, but it also, this is one of the most controversial pieces of legislation. It also allocates funds for harsher prison sentences and the very famous three-strike rule. So that you could have small offenses, but if those offenses build up and you have 3 strikes, then you're spending more time in jail. Right? So the policy pieces actually are really important, and they align directly with those massive spikes in the numbers of people in the Black community who are being incarcerated. The U.S., this is no surprise, we imprison the most people in the world. The most prisons and the most prisoners are here in the United States. It is a big business. I kid you not. Multi-billion-dollar business. Privatization of prisons has been occurring, and prisoners being farmed out for different kinds of labor. That money going back to the private organizations that run the prisons. If that's not slavery, I don't know what is. And again, here's a visualization of your lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for U.S. residents born, and this is actually in 2001. And the statistics haven't changed too much since then. But if you are a white man, you have a 1 in 17 chance of potentially landing in jail or prison or a federal prison. If you are a Black man, it's 1 in 3. If you are a Latino man, Latinx, it is 1 in 6. For all women, it's 1 in 56. For white women, 1 in 111. If you're a Black woman, it is 1 in 18, and a Latinx woman, it is 1 in 45. All right? So those are some pretty shocking statistics that I feel really back up this theory of the third wave of slavery really is around this idea of mass incarceration. This particular graph is for arrests for boys. Actually, arrests for boys have decreased, but arrests for girls, Black girls, has actually increased significantly. These statistics are actually from Washington, D.C. There's a group that has been studying the incarceration rates of Black girls. And if you get a chance, please, there's a young lady who's been doing some wonderful work out there. Her name is Monique Morris, and actually we did our doctoral work together at Fielding Graduate University. And she's been doing a lot of this work in Washington, D.C. and in Baltimore. She has some wonderful TED Talks about it as well. But we're seeing Black girls being arrested and detained, expelled from school at far more alarming rates than their Black male counterparts, and obviously greater than their white counterparts as well. So, parents who are in prison. So not only is it the prisoner that is impacted, but the entire family structure is impacted anytime somebody is incarcerated. It really tears apart at the fabric of our entire community, but in particular the Black community. And you can see here that the number of fathers in prison has increased 76%, and the number of mothers in prison increased 122% between 1991 and 2007. So if you go back to thinking about some of the policies that were put in place at that time, we're seeing a lot more mothers being incarcerated. When a mother is incarcerated, more often than not, the children that are left behind are either put with a grandparent, a relative, or are put in foster care. When a father is in prison, more often than not, the child gets to stay with the mother. So think about the impact of having a mother in prison versus a father in prison on how that can really destroy a community. More often than not, that child is put with either a relative or is landing in foster care. This is something that only Maine and Vermont out of the 50 states does not penalize someone or take away their voting rights based on them having been in prison or have a felony charge against them. All other states have some form of voter disenfranchisement, right? So for some states, even if you have served your time and are out of the system, it can still impact your ability to vote, right? And I don't know that everybody knows that. So 6.1 million Americans cannot vote because of a felony conviction. And if we go back to our statistics, many of these are from the Black community. 1 of every 13 African Americans has lost their voting rights due to felony disenfranchisement law versus 1 in every 56 non-Black voters. So this is something, again, when we talk about what can we do, you can talk to your legislators about changing these kinds of policies, advocating for, if you have served your time and you have done your sentence, why is that still impacting your ability to be able to vote, your ability to be able to get public housing, your ability to be able to get a Pell Grant to go back to college? I put this slide in, I took this slide out. I put this slide in, I took this slide out. I put this slide in. So this is where we may need to sit with a little bit of uncomfortableness. Right? What is white privilege? Well, I'll tell you my story. How about that? So, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, which is not a wealthy, sort of the northeast corner of Pennsylvania, coal country, not a very wealthy area of the country, nor did I come from a wealthy background. I actually came from a very poor background, and none of my grandparents finished high school. My parents did finish high school. I'm the first person in my family ever to even attempt to go to college. And when I was in 6th and 7th grade, I actually was considered homeless. I lived in Salem, Massachusetts, and lived there with my mother and my brother and her current boyfriend, who was not very nice. And we lived in a pay-by-the-hour motel. And under the McKinney-Vento Act, which is a federal act, I did not have a permanent address. And so I was considered actually homeless at that point. We didn't have a car, and it's a story I actually don't tell very often. I've just begun to tell this story, and not that I was ashamed of it. I think that you normalize things, and it just seemed like a normal part of who I was, and sort of no big deal, right? So starting in 6th grade, I was probably about 11 years old, maybe. I actually started working at the motel, so it was pay by the hour, so you can connect those dots for yourself as to what that motel was. It was called the Mayflower Motel. It actually doesn't even exist in Salem, Massachusetts anymore. When you crossed over the bridge from Beverly to Salem, that's where the motel existed. It's since been torn down. I actually started working there while I was going to school. I would help out the women who would be cleaning the rooms. So if anybody left a tip, they would split it with me. And I have to tell you, I saw a lot at the age of 11 at a place like that. And you saw the best that people can be, and I saw the worst that people can be, kind of all rolled up into one. And we were there for 2 years. We lived in one tiny little room, had a hot plate, and I was ridiculously embarrassed to have any of my friends. The one thing you want to be when you're that age is you want to be like everyone else, and I wasn't like everyone else. And so the one place, though, that I could feel super safe was the school library. And the librarian would let me come into school early, and she would let me stay late, and she would let me eat my lunch at the library, as long as I would help to put the books away. And so I got to sit there a lot, early and late, because I didn't really want to go back to where I lived. And so I fell in love with books and with reading and with librarians and libraries, and they're still my heroes. I don't feel privileged in any way, shape, or form. But what was the one thing that did not hold me back? What was the one thing that I never had to worry about? Thank you. I never had to worry about the color of my skin. It's the word privilege that I think makes people feel uncomfortable. There are people from the white community who have stories like mine who say, well, wait a minute, I grew up and I struggled. I had to work for everything. It was difficult for me. My parents were poor. I went without A, B, and C. And that is absolutely true. And that doesn't take away from anyone's story at all. But the one thing that they didn't have to worry about was that the color of their skin would make somebody view them differently. They didn't have to worry about that, and I didn't have to worry about that. And so that's white privilege. That's where the white community and people within the white community can feel guilty. And they don't have the vocabulary necessarily to know how to express that. And Dr. King wanted us to live in that space together. That space where we felt uncomfortable, and there was tension, and that was okay. As long as we were being honest and open and vulnerable with one another in that space, we could make a change. We can make a difference. And it can be as little as that. It's as little as just being vulnerable with one another. Okay? Because we're so afraid of offending that we don't say something. And we don't speak, and we need to. And Dr. King would want us to do that. Okay? There are other privileges. We all have some form of a privilege. It could be an economic privilege. It could be the color of your skin. It could be that you're heterosexual and you never have to worry about someone judging you because of your sexual orientation or your religion or a disability that you might have or because you have a mental illness. We all have some kind of a privilege. It's a matter of recognizing that privilege, acknowledging it, and saying, okay, I have this power, how can I help others? And this is something, so what can you do? So an example. So many of us here are leaders in our community. Obviously, we're sitting here together. The next time you're asked to sit on a panel or speak in an event, ask who else has been invited. Is everybody white? Is everybody a man? And if so, step aside. Make room for someone else. Give up a piece of your white privilege, your power, whatever it is, whether it's your gender, your color, whatever, your economic background. Step aside and let others come up. So it's about acknowledging it and then saying, you know what, how can I use this? How can I use this power to give somebody else a hand up, to make space? Because if there are decisions being made in any sphere whatsoever, we all should be there. Racism hurts all of us, not just the person who has a different color skin. It hurts all of us. The statistics and the research bear this out. The more diverse a group you have together, the better decisions you actually make. You actually come to a better decision than you would if everyone is the same sitting in the room making that decision. And research bears it out over and over. So I met Winnie when we were, as I said, I was teaching a class on prison literature. And I didn't know much about it. My formal background was in English literature, and again, as I said, I loved reading. And so I wanted to challenge myself, and I wanted to delve into a kind of literature that I had never experienced before. And so I developed a course for Pittsburgh State University in our adult ALPA program, Adult Learning in the Pittsburgh Area program. They're non-credit courses. And Winnie and a group of students were so very brave. I think there were maybe about 10 of us. They signed up for the course. I didn't know who would show up. And I didn't know where the course would take us. I never really thought that we would begin to discuss any issues around race. I was that naive. I don't know how I thought we were going to talk about incarceration and prison literature and not tackle that. That's how naive I was. We started the class actually by brainstorming all of the different words that came to mind when we thought of somebody who is incarcerated. And so that's the first sort of thing that we did together. And you can see here, this is sort of a word cloud of all the words. I actually held on to the word cloud for some reason. And you can see here, these were all of the different words that come to mind when you think of somebody who is in prison. And you think of gangs, uneducated, drug users, poor, depressed, outsiders, bad seed, people using the words like, well, they're animals, hopeless, selfish, lost. And so this is how we began thinking about what did people think, what were some of the words that came to mind whenever you think of somebody who's in prison. The other piece that I asked the class to do, I'm going to ask you to do it here today, is the moment that I say prisoner, you have an image that comes into your head. Hold on to that image. Because whoever popped into your head may or may not be what you think they are. It's a human being. And I know that the moment that I said that word in class, I thought of a black male. We began delving into the writing that occurs in prisons. And I was amazed at the talent, the level of emotion, of the poetry that was coming out of our prisons. We looked at, our class probably looked at, I don't know, maybe like 10 to 12 different programs all across the country, programs for all different kinds of inmates, ones that were specifically for women, ones that were specifically for men, and we, just really began thinking about, what was the message, what was being said by the prisoners, and why poetry? You know, why would it be other kinds of forms of writing, novels, short stories? And I have to tell you, there is something to poetry in that you can bend it to whatever form you would like. And so I think that if you are incarcerated, you have very little impact on your surroundings. You can't change your cell, you can't change when you go to the bathroom, you cannot change what you're going to be eating, you can't change your clothes every day. It is so highly structured that one of the few things that is left to you that you can have impact on are the thoughts in your head and the words that you can put down on paper. And poetry really allows you to be able to sort of bend words and bend time and make them into whatever it is you would like. So this particular poem is called My Patience Strong. Whose thoughts are these that cloud my mind and give me thoughts of suicide? These chains that bind no one can see. I only know I must break free. Mistake me not for one that's tamed. A captivity, yes, but not a slave. My patience strong, not known to yield. I've suffered many wrongs and ills. Disinherited, my shield, like that dark night, sustains me in my endless fight. Not all can know the pain I feel, for these chains that bind, not all can feel. This cycle full of misery, pain, conflicting thoughts drive me insane. To live, to die, or just exist, to right past wrongs or be a misfit, to live a lie or suffer wrongs, a Negro or one warrior born, a man indeed, these chains that bind, on no one can see. Echoes from the distant past, with links like steel from the very first to the very last. My people are a nation strong, who've suffered many ills and wrongs. What was done to them is still done to me. I only know I must break free. So really amazing pieces of poetry coming out of the prisons. And, you know, again, really moments of vulnerability for the prisoners. This one is called Prison Abyss. Fallen angels crash and burn, ashes to ashes, no return. Charred and tattered, broken then crushed, beyond recognition, dust to dust. It's beautiful words. And again, you know, it's so similar to what Dr. King is writing. He's sitting in a Birmingham jail, although he's writing an essay where, you know, I'll read some of his words in a minute, and I would say that they are actually poetry. This one's called The Ultimate Gangster. This one's was written in 2005 from a California prison. This one says, lies and deceit, that pitiful demand that lies at our feet. He tried to deceive us with power, and when all that he had was a fatal disease, he promised he'd give us the power to cope, when all that he had was a small bag of dope. Well, the ultimate gangster will need a new plan. There's a spirit that lives in me that makes me a man, a spirit that gives me both power and hope, a spirit that gives me a life without dope. This was written by a woman imprisoned. A woman's pain is universal. A woman's tears are global. We love the same. We cry the same. We lose the same. We all settle for less of the same. We prostitute our minds, sell our emotions short, sometimes at no price at all. We trust the same, fall and prey as victims of abuse and misuse. We are all the same, our struggle the same, universal. And then this last one by Ebony Delaney, who was imprisoned, called I Can't Breathe. I can't breathe, for your hate stifles me, marred by your anger, scarred by your bigotry. For generations, the stench of injustice that I've forced to inhale How long, O Lord, must I endure this constant hell? From the scorched lands of my ancestors to the bountiful shores of this place, racial intolerance has haunted me and stolen the grace from my pace. So much progress, yet so little ground gained. We've made progress, right? But no progress. Right? Injustice is always near. It wears so many names. I've witnessed the disgrace, the travesties of the so-called truth. I've choked on the stench of lies as my ancestors, the white man's noose. I can't breathe. No breath can I take. Will I forever be degraded? Is my skin God's mistake? Ebony Delaney, I can't breathe. That's powerful. I mean, that's just good, right? And we go back to the word cloud. Uneducated. Look how big it was in our word cloud. We said it so many times. Right? You have to define education. This is a group of former inmates that actually did work together. They did some poetry work together while they were incarcerated. They all get out and decide to form a poetry group. And they're all out now and supporting one another, and they're continuing to write, which I think is really amazing. At Fitchburg State University, one of our professors, Kate Buell, who's from the mathematics department, actually goes into the local prisons and actually teaches. There is a program that we work with Mount Wachusett Community College, where we actually go into the prisons and we teach some courses there. Tufts University actually has a program where their students, their undergraduate students, actually take courses with some incarcerated prisoners so that they can actually do some writing together. So there's some really amazing programs that are out there. You actually can also volunteer if you are interested in sharing your writing and your poetry with other prisoners. You can do so anonymously through a nonprofit organization. So if you're interested in reading poetry by prisoners and sharing your own writing with them, you can do so anonymously and mail it back and forth to one another, actually. This is a group of female prisoners who did a writing program together, and you can see here they sort of graduate from their writing program, and it's really meaningful for them to have a voice in a system that really doesn't give you a voice. And our course, again, I really didn't plan on talking about race, but we couldn't avoid it. You couldn't talk about incarceration. You couldn't read the writing that we were reading and not have those conversations with one another. And I'm forever grateful that I was able to have that with that wonderful group of students. All right, there's me. I was at the Women's March just a few days ago in Boston, and there was probably had about 10,000, 15,000 people that were at the Women's March on Saturday. That's me. I'm there with my youngest daughter. We look a lot alike, don't we, Elizabeth? And those are some of the signs. The Black Lives Matters movement was there as well. The Me Too movement was there. I believe that we're in an era of reaction to the election that occurred in 2016, where if it's done nothing else, it's re-energized, I believe, people into getting out and into resisting and into protesting. I think it looks different in the age of social media than it did years ago when people were protesting, when Dr. King was protesting, and when they were protesting, say, during the Vietnam War era. But these are some of the signs. These are actual pictures that I took that day, and Ayanna Presley was the keynote speaker, which was pretty amazing. She got to come up and she got to speak. And so something that you can do is really passing down, as I was there with my daughter, passing down this idea of showing up, like you here today. Showing up and listening and being in the moment. Showing up and being part of protests and rallies. making sure that you're aware of where your privileges are, and being aware of them. There's nothing you can do about the color of your skin, but you have to be aware of that, okay? About where your privilege lies. It was a great day, and I'm glad that I got to share it with my daughter Elizabeth. I put up the good signs. I can tell you, there's some nasty signs out there. But they were funny, but I only grabbed these few very creative young ladies with their words out there. And again, Dr. King here, with his love of books, he's reading a book there by Mahatma Gandhi, and certainly so well educated there in his doctoral robes, right? Which is pretty amazing. Last thing I wanted to do was to read just a quick excerpt from his writing for you. And thank you for your time so much. I talked a little bit about how I thought that Dr. King's writing really, for me, when he's in that jail for those 11 days, for me, this is poetry. And I hope this inspires you. This is just a very tiny excerpt of his essay, but he says, so this is his response to the clergy calling him an extremist, right? And he says, but as I continue to think about the matter, right, the matter of being called an extremist, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God. Was not John Bunyan an extremist? I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience. And was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists for hate. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice, or will we be the extremists for the cause of justice? And his parting words in the essay: never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? Thank you very much for your time. Questions that you might have, or to pass this off to the next person. Yes?
I know statistics on different countries' incarceration. Was India so low because of the economy?
The United States, actually, we have more people incarcerated, like percentage-wise, than any other country in the entire world.
So it's not the economy.
No, it's not the economy. We are literally incarcerating at an alarming rate right now. Well, I thank you for your time.
Thank you so very, very much. Wonderful, thought-provoking stuff that we knew, that stuff when you hear it again, it just it makes me just shake all over. It makes me want to cry. But that's what we're here for, is to cry together, talk together, sing together, talk together, challenge, and be with one another. And we have done that together today. We have seen what happens when a committed group of individuals give time and attention to important matters under heaven. And we have a presentation that we would love to give to our speaker, a certificate of appreciation for you sharing with us. Thank you.
I'm going to read the inscription. Certificate of Appreciation. The Montechusett Martin Luther King Coalition honors Speaker Dr. Lisa Moisen, Assistant Dean, Graduate in Continuing Education, Fitchburg State University, for imparting insight, inspiration, and validating the voice of voiceless incarcerated individuals, with appreciation for being committed to creating a better future and fostering the beloved community envisioned by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. through your worthy work as an educator. Presented on Monday, January 21st, 2019.
So let us be proud and full of hope, for today we came together to build a beloved community. And today we leave here with some hope, questions, connections, and concerns. Please come here on February 10th at 2 to 4 when we gather again in community to continue wrestling with racism, a discussion we have 4 times a year, where we get into the cuss and discuss about the racism that is in our society. And we continue to talk about the root causes of racism in our nation today, and to deepen our understanding of the issues that King dared us to dream about. I was telling a reporter earlier today, I reread King every year. I've been reading King for 30 years since seminary. Each year I read him and I think, this man has such incredible depth. I will never in my lifetime grasp everything that he was trying to say. But what I do get is his courageous, loving, kind, and just determined spirit. And to be a non-pacifist, to be a pacifist, to be non-violence is so hard, because some days I just want to, I don't even want to tell you what I want to tell you. You probably wouldn't like that, to hear that from a minister, but there are some days when I am just so mad that it's hard. It's really hard. But I know that King would want me to settle in and find my center, find it with you, find it by walking beside and with you as we try to overcome, Martin Luther King Jr. said, human progress comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God and co-workers with one another. He continued, we shall overcome because no lie can live forever. We shall overcome because truth crushed to the earth shall rise again. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome is a gospel hymn that was carried into the labor movement in the 1940s. There's a wonderful history of that in your program. It became the song that some of us sang when we gathered at protests for racial justice, at vigils to mark those painful and tragic times, at marches to put our bodies into action for a vision. And it is a song that we sing today because we hold its words as a beacon of hope and a vision to strive for. And in that same dedicated spirit, then, let us join together and sing with the commitment that we will, in our own way, big or small, continue continue the work for which Dr. King sacrificed his life, the life we have celebrated here today. We Shall Overcome is in your hymnal. We also have handouts for it. Is it number 169? Can you write it? All right, Chantel's going to lead us. All we need to do is raise our voices and sing.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall stand together. We shall stand together. We shall